The next EU4 update, as well as the Nordic countries DLC, is around the corner, and there are a massive amount of changes coming with it, both to the basic mechanics of the game, including a revamped combat system, and a lot of new playstyles alongside the various mission packs for the countries included in the DLC. Today we're going to go through all of this, and we're also going to talk about some hidden mechanics that have not really been discussed as much, but have been hinted at. One of the most amazing mission trees coming in the next DLC is that of the nation of Riga, a one province minor or city-state, whatever you want to call it. Riga has a small mission tree, but definitely extremely flavorful. Every single one of these missions is insanely strong and makes this country a different type of playstyle. Not playing wide, not playing tall, playing city. That's correct. We're playing city with this mission tree here. What do I mean by this? Well, historically, the city of Riga was a special entity, and they tried to reflect this in the game, first off, by offering specific triggered modifiers to the city. You can get all of these modifiers from the mission tree, and as you can see, you need to have less than 6 provinces, so you do have to play tall essentially, and you need to have specific buildings in the city of Riga. Honestly, that one Riga province is going to be more powerful than any other province in the game with these insane modifiers right here that you can easily get quite early on in the game according to the mission tree. You will have the ability to subjugate both the Livonian Order and the Teutonic Order from your mission tree, and that is actually going to offer you a historical friendship with these orders, as well as a permanent modifier of yearly army tradition and vassal force limit contribution. So despite having a maximum of 6 cities to most optimally use that mission tree, you can have insanely overpowered vassals, which of course you can turn into marches that makes these vassals even stronger. The rest of the mission tree focuses on other aspects of your country. You can join the empire from one of your early missions, as well as you can change your government to a Catholic plutocracy at first that offers 1 extra merchant, and this is unique to Riga, and then afterwards you can upgrade this to a theocratic plutocracy, which offers dev cost reduction, advisors, as well as church power and enforced religion through war. This happens a bit later on after the reformation triggers, and there's been a bit of a change with indulgences where you can actually offer indulgence once you have the Catholic plutocracy government reform. As Riga, it does cost a little bit as it increases your reform desire, but you do get a huge amount of money, and the nation that you offer indulgence for profits from this as well. So especially for multiplayers, this has a lot of potential for rolling, in my opinion. Meanwhile, the theocratic plutocracy, which is the Protestant version of the Regan government, instead of selling indulgence, which you don't have anymore because you're a Protestant nation, you get the option to raid heretic churches, and that offers you either church power or fervor depending on your religion, which used correctly can turn that nation into a really powerful nation, since you can change your aspects extremely quickly with this war interaction. The sell indulgence mission, as well as the other missions that branch out afterwards, focus on the trade aspect and how you interact with both Catholic and Protestant nations, as well as your position in the Hanseatic League. Mercenary contracts halves the army professionalism costs for all mercenary companies, so by getting this mission, you can get a good mix of both mercenary armies and regular units, because if you are gonna stay small, you will need the mercenaries, that's for sure. Another massive change to the update itself is the fact that merchant republics now will have both the factions and the estates. So the big debuff for merchant nations before the lack of estates has been fixed. Not to mention you keep the factions, so that's like double the strength, plus the Grand Vesha Republic, which is the Novgorod Republic, gets a boost as well with manpower, governing capacity, and merchants alongside everything else that it had from before. So forming Russia as Novgorod is a lot easier and a lot more entertaining now. There's a lot of other government reforms that have sneaked their way in the 1.34 EU4 update. All of these here that you see on the screen are basically for republics, but we have reforms added in for monarchies as well. So it's not gonna be just the same old 3 government reforms for tier 1 monarchies and republics, but there's gonna be different ones with different choices. My favorite is probably the limit the royal court, which makes it so that you get less loyalty debuff when you seize crownlands and your estates get less influence. So that's especially great for people like me that abuse the mechanics of the estates as much as I do. The juicy stuff comes when we discuss the combat changes, because these changes are significant to the game. They start talking about the current meta and how it all works right now and what the problems are, which they seem to be aware of. Personally, I'm really happy to see that they're getting rid of the zombie regiments. If you don't know what that is, it says right here, essentially regiments that have 0 strength, that means regiments that have no troops, no manpower in them, are still guaranteed 12 days before they get schnitzeldorfed, and they will remove those 12 days in the next update. That means no more zombie regiments whatsoever. If you have 0 strength in your regiment, you're dead, which essentially means that enemy armies cannot reinforce within those 12 days with actual troops. They also reworked the way that morale damage is handed out in 1.34, and now deployed troops take a daily morale damage of 1% of max morale, whilst reserves take 2% of max morale on a daily basis. So that means if you have a lot of troops sent in battle and you're overstacking, you're gonna lose a lot faster, because all of your reserves, the troops that are not on the front line or on the back row, they're taking so much morale damage. It's better to just slowly trickle in units, which is what the intended mechanic is for the game anyway, and what likely a lot of people are not doing, but you know, you'll learn. Eventually you will learn. Another massive change is the fact that the max morale is not based on the regiment itself, but on the average of all the regiments on the other side. And here's where it gets really juicy. Listen closely to what I say next. Such that in a standoff between a Prussian and a regular soldier, where neither is shooting, the regular soldier will run first. Why would they say a Prussian and a regular soldier, boys? They could say a Streltsy and a regular soldier, a Cossack and a regular soldier, but they say a Prussian. That definitely is in line with my theory that we're gonna see either Prussian or Swedish special units. They kind of let it slip with this comment here. It's not confirmed, but it definitely reinforces my suspicions that we are gonna get special Prussian units with either extra morale or extra discipline or something of the sorts. And I'm really excited for it. I hope I'm right about this. They're also changing it so that whenever you start a battle against a person that has more morale than you, you remember that you see your army has less morale once that battle starts. Well, now it's a little bit different, and they showed the percentage of your own average morale rather than the maximum of all regiments on either side. So it should be a little bit easier to tell when you're going to be losing, as your morale is going to be trickling down a lot faster than the enemy's morale. They also talk about insufficient support. Essentially, whenever you are above the infantry to cavalry ratio, you get a flat minus 25 military tactics debuff. Well, now it's going to be minus 1 military tactics per percentage of cav to infantry ratio. This is irrelevant in my opinion, because in most cases you're not going to have more cavalry than infantry, and whenever you do have that, you also have the supporting cav to infantry ratio bonus, because you're either a horde or a nation that has good cavalry. There's also a massive rework of artillery, and for example, we have the first 3 artilleries, 2 options for each, and they're vastly different now. They do mention how neither one is better than the other, but I beg to differ on that point, because level 7 artillery, your starting artillery, you have the option between no fire damage and morale damage, or fire damage and morale defense. Now, in case you don't know what this means, essentially, if for example you go for the hoofness, you will inflict more casualties on the enemy armies, and that means you're gonna kill more of their enemy manpower, whilst the large mortar instead does not kill the enemy, but it deals morale damage to the enemy. So that means you will technically win the battles, because the faster you drain the enemy morale, the faster you win the actual battle. Later on for Tech 10 is basically a similar approach. The way that they made it is they call it the Pedera, the anti-cavalry weapon. Now, the most most significant change in 1.34 is the fact that reinforcements are going to be restricted to 2 back row reinforcements per day, plus 1 per 2 maneuver pips of commanding generals. So that means if your general has 6 maneuver, you're going to get an extra 3 regiments able to reinforce per day. So maneuver from your generals is now extremely important. But of course, this is for the late game, because in the early game, you're not going to have enough troops to even fill your combat with, let's be fair here. And it's mostly aimed at multiplayer games, in my opinion. They mentioned that as well. This is intended to increase tactical depth in multiplayer. And indeed, armies with low amounts of artillery are a lot more vulnerable in the 1.34 update, with cavalry becoming a little bit more important in the 2 distinct phases of battle. I still think that no one's going to use cavalry because of the cost differences, and because cavalry needs a bit more of a buff overall. On the 31st of May, they revealed the Danish mission tree, and this is a very long mission tree, which despite the trend with most mission trees in the next DLC coming up as multiple branch missions, this mission tree is pretty straightforward by comparison, and it only has 3 missions that are branch mission based on whatever religious outcome you go for. The rest of them are very easy to do, as well as easy to understand. So to start off, they start talking about how the Kalmar Union worked, and they tried to implement a lot more flavor revolving around the Kalmar Union, which is basically the union of Denmark over Norway and Sweden at the start of the game. It is essentially a unique government reform at the start called the Kalmar Union, obviously, and the starting one is not so much of a great reform. I would say it's a little bit of a debuff. Essentially, you cannot integrate or abandon personal unions, but you get 2 diplomatic relations. So on the positive side, it's not as bad as it could be, I guess. They talk about the new mechanic with getting a new leader when you have the Kalmar Union active. Essentially, whenever your leader dies and you have to get a new leader, you're gonna get an election for a new king, and based on the loyalty threshold of your subjects, this new leader will either be accepted or not so much accepted. In order to make sure all of your leaders are accepted, you need to have below 10% liberty desire in your personal unions, and then they always get accepted. If it's above 90% liberty desire that they have, then they never get accepted, and then you have a lot of issues. Alternatively, you can grant your subjects additional privileges, which give you some debuffs, but this way you ensure that the leader gets properly elected and you don't have any trouble with your personal unions. From the PU side, this is what it looks like. You get the election of the King of Sweden whenever the new guy comes to be, and you have 2 options: either agree with the election or propose a Swedish or Norwegian king to rule over the union, in which case you get the event for a Swedish or Norwegian regent, or otherwise you can just go with elect a local regent instead. This is also kind of a for Denmark, because let's say you get the elected king with really bad mana points. Well, what happens then is you can also go for the local regent from Sweden or Norway, and you get a chance of getting a better leader in that case. It shows here, for example, you can get a 026 from the Swedes with the king from the Swedes, or reject their pretender king, and then you get some liberty desire in that PU, as well as some rebels spawning in. Aside from the new Kalmar Union mechanics, the mission tree itself at the start focuses on your initial situation. Getting good relations with Norway and Sweden does your first 2 missions. Retaking Gotland, obviously from the rebels, does the other mission as well. So these are fairly easy to do. Same goes for integrate of Holstein, but then the nobles of Sweden is a different story. Essentially, this is going to trigger a couple of events, and based on the outcome of these events, you can either get the Pretender War of Sweden that offers minus 100 liberty desire in Sweden, as well as it makes Sweden your historical friend, or on the opposite pole, it can make Sweden your historical rival, but they still lose 100 liberty desire, albeit they gain 25 back just for a couple of years, and they also get a pretty significant relations debuff. Navigating the nobles of Sweden and finishing that mission leads to the ratifying of the Kalmar Union, which grants you a new government reform, the Unified Kalmar Monarchy reform, which is, in my opinion, kind of overpowered. I mean, mean, first off, it allows personal unions to be integrated after 10 years. You can integrate them the same like you would a vassal, essentially. You don't need to wait for 50 years. Only 10 years is insane. Plus, they grant military bonuses to the leader of the union as well as to the junior partners. So, personal unions will behave the same like marches. They get the military bonuses and they give you the military bonuses. If you have 10 unions, aside from the fact that you can integrate them within 10 years, they give massive military bonuses, making Denmark potentially insanely overpowered. Take note that you need to have the Kalmar Union government reform whenever you do this mission. Otherwise, in return, you get just 100 monarch points if you don't have it. And the military bonuses per junior partner include flat 2,000 manpower and 400 sailors, as well as an additional 5% global manpower modifier and global sailor modifier. So if you have 10 unions, you get 50% maximum manpower, which is insane. There are a few role-playing aspects to the new Danish revamp. Essentially, you can get the Arch King title as the leader, but it's only a role-playing thing. It doesn't actually do anything in game. Well, it makes you lose 10 legitimacy, I guess. You also get a unique decision where you can get all the Hanseatic trading cities under your control. Well, they get an option to submit to you, otherwise they declare war on you and can call in all of the members of their trade leagues. So you could end up potentially fighting multiple trade leagues. For example, if Riga and Lübeck have their own separate trade leagues, you gotta be careful with this before you enact it. Eventually, after you do the cities of Hansa, expand the sound toll and control of the channel, you will get 25% trade efficiency, which is insanely overpowered. This is a permanent modifier, not a temporary one. So if you really want to go full trade as Denmark, you can be the strongest trade nation in the game. Remember those few religious missions that we talked about where you basically branch out? Well, you get the option to either stay a Catholic nation or you can become Protestant, or you get a third option where you try and mend both sides, I guess. They don't really talk about the third option too much, but it does lead me to a couple of questions. Towards the bottom part of the mission tree, you also have the German mercenaries as well as the German mercenary army, which has potential to give you a mercenary manpower and maintenance bonuses until the end of the game, as well as some extra unique mercenary companies that you can recruit from the Germanic areas, essentially. Plus, recruiting mercenaries will not cost any army professionalism whilst this modifier is active. So you can basically have a super professional army as well as a mercenary army at the same time. And the mercenary companies you will be unlocking is dependent on your relations with the nations of origin for these mercenary companies, so like Saxony, Hesse, Württemberg, and Switzerland. There's also some new ideas for the Danes. Some of these have actually been reshuffled. Overall, they did add extra mercenary discipline, increase morale of navies by 5%, colonial settlers increase as well, you get autonomy reduction. Essentially, most of the ideas unlock 2 modifiers now for Denmark, which is pretty good. And they've also buffed up the Venetian ideas, which now include development cost reduction and a few extra trade ideas that are really going to help out, like the trade steering plus 33%. That is massive, by the way. And if you have the Rule Britannia DLC, you're going to get some new naval doctrines also for the Danes. The Norwegians get their special marine force limit and fleet movement speed, as well as the Dutch get the colonial range and ship trade power. This really is going to help the Dutch with colonization, to be fair. They also mentioned they might add some more naval doctrines, but they don't mention for which nations right now. On the 7th of June, they released the Swedish mission tree, which definitely reaffirms some of my old suspicions. We do have the special Swedish units. The mission tree itself is absolutely massive. I mean, look at this thing. And it focuses on various aspects of the Swedish nation. You start off with your basic missions here that are easy to do and revolve around becoming an independent nation at first, right? Because you start as a PU of Denmark. Essentially, all 4 of these starting missions here are missions to get you ready for the war. Once you've done all of those missions, then you get a modifier here that offers manpower recovery speed, war exhaustion reduction, and liberty desire plus 25. That is massive. And if you win the war without any foreign support, that means nobody's supporting you, then you get additional rewards. Namely, you get 300 mana points overall, 200 splendor, prestige, and legitimacy after you've won won the war. Now, if you do have nations supporting your independence and helping you out, you lose prestige and legitimacy, so it kind of encourages you to do that war by yourself. You also get Mr. Johann Vasa as a general. He did become a leader. He's a 644 with an average claim, a ruler, plus you get until his death stability cost reduction and legitimacy, so that's pretty great. Johann Vasa is one of the most important figures in Swedish history. They also show off what support from the estates offers you. After you become an independent nation, you have some pretty standard missions here. You have Skaneland, basically owning all of the Scania lands in the south of Sweden, taken from the Danes. The German coastline is basically Pomerania. You get claims on all of these areas here. Now, stabilize the kingdom, and the Kingdom of Poland is a little bit different because the Crown of Poland mission leads you to getting a restoration of Union CB on Poland, or alternatively, you can just conquer all of their provinces. Or the third option is you become historical friends with them. I don't think anyone's actually going to go for the third option. You also get a claim on Norwegian throne. You can get a personal union on Norway, as well as you can get some provinces from Denmark with the same Norwegian crown CB that comes via the Swedish Scanialand mission that I showed earlier. You can become an empire from your missions as well, Scandinavian Empire, and it also offers maximum absolutism plus 20. This is great for the late game because it's going to make it easier for you to get 100 absolutism while still having some privileges for your country. A very interesting mission here, the Varangian routes, which you get from this mission, Lord of Eastern Europe, offers you 15 trade power in all of the nodes that eventually spill into the Baltic node. Now, this first part here up until the bottom line is the conquest missions essentially for the Swedish tree, but afterwards the bulk of the missions that Sweden have are flavor missions that are not necessarily claims on this and that. They said that the mission tree is branched out into 5 branches: internal missions about the Sami and Swedish peasants, Swedish colonialism, trade and industrialization, military reforms, and religious matters. And you actually can see that because every one of these lines going downwards does seem to have a different topic, and the religious part, all of them are branching missions because it depends on whether you stay Catholic or you become a Protestant nation. The Dacia War disaster is also going to trigger a lot more often now for the Swedes because the requirements have been changed. Once the Protestant Reformation triggers, expect to have to go through this event chain. One really cool mission, Integrate the Sami, offers you this awesome privilege, forest expansion, where for every province that is a forest or a woods, you get reduced development cost by 15% and 10% respectively. For playing tall nations, this is amazing, and the fact that this is restricted to Sweden, which mostly has forests and wood provinces, it's gonna make them a lot more of a playing tall nation that they already are. They quickly mentioned that the reward for the forestry mission is 40% less dev cost in Arctic Scandinavian provinces. So the amount of dev cost reduction bonuses is just insane for this nation now. Kinda a little bit overpowered if you ask me. Let's not forget about the good old copper mine in Dallaskogen that everybody is aware of. It can give you to 5 mercantilism, or you can just get some money from it, or split it, half money, half mercantilism. We also get 3 branches of the religious part of the mission tree. So we have one for the Catholics, one for the Protestants, and another one that is in between. I don't know how you settle that. It does say that it's the humanist path to the right, and you get religious peace, multicultural kingdom. From the bonuses here, the Catholic and Protestant defender, the true faith modifier, is the best one. Sweden did historically play a major part in the religious wars, and they tried to show this by giving out a special decision for the Swedes, where every Catholic nation in Europe will see this as an act of religious hostility, reducing their opinion of us by 100%, but this allows the Protestant and Catholic leagues to be enabled. Essentially, Sweden can trigger the league wars as soon as they want to with this decision, and Sweden obviously joins the Protestant League. It's pretty easy to get this done. Also, you either need to have a Protestant elector as your ally, you don't need to be a part of the HRE, so this is the only nation that is not an HRE elector that can start the league war, right? Alternatively, you can also have a Protestant 100 development HRE nation that you're allied to. They also mention about the Finnish Hapa Piki Piki Perro and the Carolean units. The Hapa Piki Piki guys are basically a cavalry mercenary units, whilst the Caroleans are special Swedish units that we'll talk a bit in a few moments. Eventually, much later in the game, you'll be able to get a special government tier reform, the allotment system, which allows the recruitment of Caroleans, which are special unique units available only to the Swedes, but they're only available in the late game because you need absolutism to have triggered before you're actually able to get this government reform. The reform itself allows you to get 25% of your army as Carolean infantry with an extra 10% land force limit modifier and a 20% national manpower. They don't mention exactly what they're gonna give out because they're not fully implemented just yet, the Carolean units, but they do mention that they deal 25% more shock damage and they receive minus 20% morale damage. So from the get-go, and if these are the bonuses that the Carolean receive, these are the strongest special units in the game right now because these two bonuses are ridiculous. And then you can also give out privileges that affect these units. 10% extra discipline for the Caroleans is just ridiculous. I mean, it actually is ridiculous. You will have a limited amount of these units. It says essentially that for every 20 development of Swedish or Finnish provinces, you will be able to recruit one Carolean regiment. But by the 1600, when you can get these units, you will likely have 2,000-3,000 development. So that's a good 100 something units, which is essentially 2 of your frontline armies. They do say it's still a work in progress, and I do hope they nerf them a little bit because even for late game, I know it's not going to be as used as you would imagine, but still, it is super strong right now. They show off some of the reforms that we're going to be expecting in the future. It's a teaser. They don't say what reforms they are. I also suspect that for the Norway tree, they might talk about the Norse religion because if they're going to add Norse religion, it's going to be a part of the Norway tree. Let me know what you guys are excited for in the next DLC and what you would like to see added or revamped. And until the next time, check out this awesome France video. And I really want to thank all my patrons, channel members, and Twitch subscribers for the amazing support you guys have been offering. I really wouldn't be able to maintain this channel without all of your help.